Hello, I'm Worski. I'm a competitive Dune Imperium YouTuber, and I'm here to tell you everything we know about Dune Imperium Uprising. So what is Dune Imperium Uprising? It's a standalone expansion to the deck-building worker placement game known as Dune Imperium. With an all-new Imperium deck, Intrigue deck, combat deck, everything is new in this game. For the most part. Apparently, all of the existing Dune Imperium leaders and cards are backwards compatible with this game. I don't know how true that actually is in looking at some of the mechanics of this game. I'd imagine a lot of the old leaders and cards would probably break some fundamental aspects of this game, but I guess we'll have to wait and see. But overall, I'd have to say I'm very happy with the direction they decided to go in with this standalone expansion. I feel like there was already so much stuff built on top of the existing Dune Imperium game that adding more on top of it would have just been a little bit too bloating for my liking. Starting fresh with new cards, new mechanisms, I think it's a really great thing. That, and I feel like it's a little overwhelming for people new to the game to learn the game plus each of these expansions, so this should make it a little bit easier for new players to get involved in the scene. So while I'm going to go over everything we currently know about Dune Imperium Uprising, there's still a lot of stuff we don't know. And that includes this Cho module, which is a built-in mini expansion that they recommend using once you're more experienced with the game. Apparently, there's a new 6-player mode that pits 2 teams against each other. And there's this whole contracts mechanism that we really have almost no information about. Apparently, it's something that's modular and can be replaced for newer players, but most people are probably going to play with them. And of course, with a new game, we're going to have an updated board. If you're familiar with the old Dune Imperium board, there's going to be a lot of differences here. But I feel like the overall architecture of the board is still the same, which is good for allowing that continuity between games. Unfortunately, this is the highest definition version of the board I could find, and we're going to be doing some analysis with this board, so it's going to get even blurrier, but we'll do the best we can. Apparently, per the designer, this board's a little bit more complicated than the base board, and that's so they can add some more thematic elements like the worms, like the shield wall, like a spies mechanic, and we're going to talk about all these things. But I think it's a good direction to go to add a little bit more complexity up front. That, and with the old board, there were a lot of meta strategies that had developed. So I'm hoping that this new board will add a little bit more variety to the things we see in this game. Okay, let's tackle this new board piece by piece. First of all, they've updated shipping, and I think this is a fantastic change. Okay, so first of all, here's the old shipping, and this is one of the most overpowered spots in the game, mainly because of how many resources you could generate with a single action. Just by visiting this one spot here, being able to go up and then down to get 2 troops, a bump, and 5 Solari or 2 spice is just insanely powerful. With the new version of the board, we still have the shipping icon. It still requires 2 influence with the guild, but now it costs 3 spice, but still generates that 5 Solari and that single bump that we all know and love. And honestly, the Solari and the bump are the main reasons we went to the track anyway, so I think it's good they cut a lot of the bloat out of the shipping process. And by making it cost 3 spice, I think it's going to be spammed a lot less in this game. Before, pretty much the old rule was if you could go to interstellar shipping, you would go there because it's the best spot. But now I think there's going to have to be a little bit more nuance as to whether or not you hit this shipping spot. And don't get me wrong, the new shipping spot is still a very good spot, and I'd imagine a lot of people are going to gravitate towards it. But it's not quite as broken as it was in the old games. And we'll get to this in a little bit, but I actually think it's going to be much harder to collect spice in this game. So that 3 spice shipping cost is going to be very significant. And we also have an updated Landsraad cancel. Pretty much every aspect of this board has been updated, but we'll take it piece by piece. First of up, we have a new Mentat. Before, it was 2 Solari, so you could get an extra card and you would get an extra action that round. Now, if you notice, there's 3 Solari cost. It requires 2 influence with the Emperor track. And in addition to getting that extra card draw, you can now trash an intrigue card to draw another one, which I think is a really cool mechanic. I really like that they introduced it with immortality because sometimes in this game you draw intrigue cards and they just suck and it feels bad and it gets stuck in your hand for a while. At least now there's a built-in mechanism in the game to kind of cycle those out and see if you can get some of the stronger ones. It remains to be seen how strong the average intrigue card deck is in Dune Imperium Uprising, but getting the option to cycle them out, I think it's just a really good strategic change. With that being said, the fact that it requires 2 influence with the Emperor, which is probably the weakest track right now, I think that's going to be a little bit tough. The fact that it's 3 Solari instead of 2 is a big price increase. I actually don't know. I think this spot's going to be pretty underutilized in this version of the game, but we'll see. It'll also depend on which leaders are available in this next expansion. I don't know if we're going to have a Duke Leto or an Ilban Rachis that's going to get a lot of value out of spending Solari. So we'll have to see how that plays out. Additionally, you'll notice that there's a new icon. Before it was this Mentat icon, but now we have this new agent icon with the up arrow. And what that means is, instead of getting an entirely new worker to place, this lets you pick up one of the workers you've already sent to the field, not the one you used to go to the Imperial privilege spot, and bring it back to your leader. So you still get that extra action, but it does end up opening up a different spot for somebody else because you have to pull back one of your workers. So overall, I think Imperium privilege is going to be a little bit weak in this game, but we'll see how it goes. There are definitely going to be better things you want to spend Solari on in this game. Okay, and next up we have the new High Council. Similar premise, 5 Solari to get an extra 2 persuasion every single round, but they added this new second plus icon. And if you notice, it generates 2 spice, an intrigue card, and 3 troops. And I think this is important because it gives you a reason to go back to the High Council seat after you've already been there once in the game. So once you have your High Council seat, you can go here again to get a little bit of spice, an intrigue card, and 3 troops. It's one of the few ways in this game to turn your Solari into spice. And like I said earlier, I think it's going to be a lot harder to get spice in this version of the game. So we'll see. I could actually see this being relevant. The only thing is, in Classic Dune Imperium, going for High Council seat means you're probably going to be going for Spice Must Flow cards at the end game. And there's an interesting aspect where Spice Must Flow strategies, usually if you're going for that, you're not going as heavy into combat. And everything you're getting by going there again is usually more geared towards combat. The intrigue card can give you a combat intrigue. You're getting troops to use in the battle. You're getting spice, which can be used for highliners. I'm interested to see how it plays out. I think the reason they added this option to go there again is for another mechanism called spies we'll talk about in a little bit. They want to give people reason to visit the spot more than once, but we'll see. Next up, we have the new Swordmaster. Not a whole lot changed here. Swordmaster giving you an extra worker to play with the entire game. The one thing you'll notice is that now, in addition to having this 8 Solari cost, there's a new little 6 Solari cost here. And what that means is the first player that gets to the Swordmaster has to pay the full 8 Solari, but everybody after that only has to pay 6 Solari. And I think this is a very important and a really good change to how the Swordmaster works. Because currently, it is a race to see who can get 8 Solari the fastest so they can get that extra worker. An extra worker in a worker placement game is going to be insane, and it is insane in Dune Imperium already. Now, the first person to get to that 8 Solari threshold is still going to get an advantage by getting that extra worker, but it's not as big of an advantage because it helps everybody else get that Swordmaster just a little bit faster. So I think getting that early Swordmaster will be disincentivized a little tiny bit, which is a good thing. I want to see a wider variety of strategies that are capable of winning the game. And right now, I feel like that variety is a little bit minimized. And we also have a new right side of the Landsraad Council track. In the base game, we had Hall of the Oratory, which gave you 1 troop and 1 persuasion. And this is the best image I could find. It was actually pretty dark. It's now called Assembly Hall, which instead of giving you 1 troop, gives you 1 intrigue card and gives you 1 persuasion. So they pretty much just subbed out the troop for the intrigue card, which is a much better reward in my opinion. Intrigue cards are always very powerful. Hopefully they're still powerful in Uprising, but I think this gives you more of a reason to get there. Usually this spot's reserved if you need that 1 extra persuasion to be able to buy a slightly better card, because what it would allow you to do is use your dagger, which has no persuasion, and turn that into 1 persuasion. But we don't even know what the base deck's going to look like yet, so we'll see how that plays out. Additionally, we have a new spot instead of rally troops, which gave 4 troops for 4 Solari, because I think this was a pretty underutilized spot. It's kind of expensive paying 1 Solari per troop. Now it's 0 Solari for 2 troops, which is really good value. And additionally, if you can pay 2 Solari, it'll get you an extra water. And I think getting water in this game is going to be incredibly important. We'll get to this in a little bit, but they've reduced the total amount of water you can get just by going to the board. So I think this is a good countermeasure to make it worth going to this gather support spot. So I've been alluding to this a little bit, but we have these new symbols on the board. And it's these weird eyeball looking symbols with lines drawn to all these different spots. And what that is the next thing we're going to talk about, which are the spies. So this is the spy icon. You'll see this on a lot of cards in this game. So whenever you trigger the spy icon, you can put one of these spy tokens onto the board, onto a spot that looks like this. There's a bunch of these scattered all over the board. Important to note that it has to be an unoccupied spot. So if somebody already has a spy in an area, unfortunately, you can't also put one there. And it allows you to do a couple of things. First of all, it can act as an infiltrate ability. So let's say somebody else has already gotten their Swordmaster. If you have a spy down, you can also go there even though there's already a worker there. Additionally, let's say you have a spy down and you want to go to, say, the High Council and nobody's there already. If you want, you can pull that spy back to draw a card. So the main 2 functions you have with regard to worker placement, you can either go somewhere someone else is, or you can just turn it into an extra card draw, which can be very relevant in a deck building game where sometimes you have some bad starter cards. Now, there's a couple of different ways in this game to get the spies on the board. One of the big ones seems to be by playing Lady Margot Fenring. With their Signet Ring ability, they can put a spy on any of the blue spots. And while we're talking about it, they also get 2 spice once they reach 2 influence with the Bene Gesserit. So Lady Margot Fenring is going to be a very spy-oriented leader. And you can even see by looking at one of the new Bene Gesserit spots, which is called Espionage, which costs 1 spice to draw 1 card and put down a spy icon. So Lady Fenring's whole kit is probably going to be about getting spies all over the board and then using those to gain an advantage. Additionally, with this new expansion, we're getting some new intrigue cards, like I said, and these are some that interact with that spy mechanism. Find Weakness lets you pull back one of your spies to gain 3 extra troops during the combat. And it's important to note that when you pull back that spy for this card, you're not getting the other benefits by going and infiltrating there or getting an extra card draw. You're using it for this effect. And it also works for Spring the Trap. Pulling back 2 spies to get 7 swords is a huge rush of combat. And it's going to be interesting because the players on the board that have a bunch of spies are going to be even more threatening in combat because there are intrigue cards that work like this. Additionally, there's also a new intrigue card called Special Mission, which lets you just get down a spy on the board on a blue spot. Or you can withdraw that spy in order for you to use this new symbol right here and gain 2 spies. We'll get into what that new symbol means a little bit later in the video, but what it does is destroy the shield wall. Apparently, there are other cards and leaders in the game that also interact with spies, so we'll have to see what those are. They're not currently available yet, but hopefully there's a lot of ways to get these things down. Okay, so we've gotten through the spy mechanism, we've gotten through the Landsraad Council and the new shipping spots. Let's talk about all the new faction spaces. And we'll start with the old Emperor track. First of all, Conspire used to give you 5 Solari, 2 troops, and an intrigue card. And you'll notice that it has changed a little bit. I'm sorry it's so blurry, but this is the best image we have. It looks like it still costs 4 spice, but now it gives you 1 intrigue card and 4 troops, instead of giving you 2 troops, an intrigue card, and 5 Solari, which I feel like has to be a downgrade, right? Getting that Solari was one of the main reasons you would want to go there. So now Solari is going to be even rarer on the board. It'll remain to be seen how popular this spot ends up being, but I can't imagine it's used too often. Additionally, they've taken away Wealth, which would give 2 Solari, and they've added in this new symbol here. I believe this symbol interacts with the contracts mechanism I talked about earlier, which we have no details on yet. So we'll have to wait and see on that one. I will speculate a little bit in the future about what that could mean. I have another slide dedicated, but right now, unless contracts are pretty strong, I'd have to imagine Emperor is going to be one of the weakest factions to play with. And moving down on our board, next up we have Highliner, which is coming back in this one. I can't tell if that's what the name says because it's so blurry. I'd imagine it's still going to be 6 spice. Maybe they reduced the price a little bit, but I cannot tell. You still get the 5 troops, but now you don't get the water anymore, which I think is a big nerf to this spot. One of the great things about this spot is that you could get the water back, get more spice so you can go Highliner in the future, and you kind of create this cycle for yourself where you can get combats, collect spice, get combats again with Highliner, and just keep going back through that cycle. But this kind of breaks that cycle a little bit. And while we're at it, they also changed Fold Space, which gave you a Fold Space card before, which pretty much had access to every single spot in the game. But now it gives you 1 water, which I actually think is pretty good. With Highliners not having water anymore, it's going to be a little bit more scarce in the game. So having a new way to get that water is going to be really important. Additionally, like we talked about, shipping requires 2 influence with the guild. So the guild being able to get you water so that you can get spice and then go to the shipping track for 3 spice, I think there's a nice little loop in that situation. So I think this will still be a pretty popular spot overall. And it's especially relevant because, the Fremen aren't giving out water anymore. There's still combat spaces and the top one still requires 1 water. But now, instead of giving 1 water for still suits, they just let you draw 1 card. And for hardy warriors, instead of giving you 2 troops, it gives you 1 troop and a trash, which I actually think is not that great. One of the powerful things about Hardy Warriors is how much combat strength it could let you get into the combat early on in the game. But now, only getting 1 troop, it's still okay. It's just not as potent as it was. I think the card trash is interesting, though. It remains to be seen how powerful an effect deck building is going to have in Dune Imperium Uprising. But this is going to be the new go-to deck building strat to get some of those weaker cards out of your deck early. Unfortunately, it does cost the water. And like I said, it's going to be a little bit harder to get water in this game. So it'll remain to be seen how often people are actually hitting this space as opposed to some of the other powerful water costing spaces. But time will tell. And then lastly, we have the new Bene Gesserit spots. So before we had selective breeding, which was that deck building area we talked about earlier. It let you trash cards and it would let you draw new cards. It was a little bit more expensive before. It used to cost 2 spice. Now it only costs 1 spice, but it gives you a card draw and it lets you put down one of these spies on the board. And important to note that every single one of these factions has a spot for a spy. So if you really need to go somewhere in the future and you want to guarantee access, getting a spy on there early on is going to be good. Lastly, it looks like they didn't decide to change secrets at all. It still gives you 1 intrigue card and lets you steal an intrigue card from anyone that has 4 or more intrigue cards in their hand. And I like this spot a lot. It's not the most powerful spot in the world, but it puts an artificial cap on how many intrigue cards people are going to have because nobody wants to get their intrigue card stolen. I think it's a really smart way to design a card limit on intrigue cards. Okay, now let's talk about the updated city spots. Working our way from right to left, first off, I'd imagine this is going to be Arakeen. It does the same thing where it gives you 1 troop and 1 card draw. So no big change there. Being able to manipulate your deck and draw more cards has always been a strong thing in Dune Imperium. So I'd imagine this is going to continue to be a pretty strong spot. The next spot, however, has been a big change. It doesn't look like it's going to be called Carthag anymore. Carthag used to give you 1 troop and let you draw 1 intrigue card. Now, I think it's going to let you pay 0 spice to gain 2 Solari, or maybe 1 spice to gain 4 Solari. That's my working understanding right now. It's actually kind of hard to tell, but it looks like it also has a spice cost here. So at the end, it's going to end up being what, like 1 spice for 2 Solari, 2 spice for 4 Solari is my best guess. But yeah, like I said, If you can make out what this symbol means better than I can, please let me know. And while we're looking at a lot of spots for spies in the city spots, we have one here, and one here to enable you to infiltrate to those spots. We also have a slight redesign of the research station, pivoting towards more of a hybrid between card draw and combat. It now gives you 2 troops where before it gave you 0. And instead, it only draws you 2 cards, whereas before it drew you 3 cards. It still costs 2 water, so it's another area to spend water in this game. But it's going to be a little less strong for getting you a ton of cards early on so you can buy stronger cards, which is always a really fun aspect of Dune Imperium that I liked. The fact that they had this research station play available so you can buy that really good card early on. Of course, paying 2 water in the beginning is going to be very expensive, but I like that the option is there to give more variety to your actions. This is going to end up basically being the new Hardy Warrior spot, letting you get 2 troops in, but it won't be available on the first round, which is where we saw Hardy Warriors being utilized a lot. Because usually the first person to hit Hardy Warriors and throw in 4 troops would pretty much auto-win the combat, because there's not a lot of other ways to get troops in early on in the game. So I think this will give us a little bit more variety when it comes to early game combats. And then our last new city spot is right here. Unfortunately, they did give us a high definition version of this one. It's called Siege Tabor. It still requires 2 influence with the Fremen, but now this is where we finally get some water back by being friends with the Fremen. We have a new symbol here, which are maker hooks. I'll talk about those in a second. It also gives you 1 troop and 1 water. I think this is going to be an amazing spot because, like I was saying, there's not a ton of ways to get water in this new board. So anything that does give us water is going to be very effective. Additionally, if you don't want to do this top one, you can also do the bottom one, which still gives you 1 water, but it gives you this shield wall breaking symbol. And we'll get into more detail. I keep putting it off. But just as a little sneak peek, this is the shield wall right here, this white outline outside of these 3 spots. But we'll talk about that in a little bit. So first of all, we have worms in this game, finally. They were always there with makers, but it just wasn't that thematic. The fact that we're going to have some awesome new looking minis and sandworms actually making a combat difference is just a very fun change. So this is the maker hook symbol, and without it, you're not able to use sandworms in combat. So if you want to make good use of these guys, you're going to have to get the Siege Tabor, which means you're going to have to get the 2 influence with the Fremen. So I think the Fremen's still going to be a pretty good spot because it lets you get these bad boys into combat. So what do the sandworms do? Well, if you're familiar with Rise of Ix, which introduced dreadnoughts that had 3 combat power, it's going to be a similar thing here with these worms having 3 combat power. And for reference, these troops right here, the base unit of the game, they have 2 combat power. So they're going to be a little bit stronger than a normal troop. And unfortunately, you also can't put them in your garrisons. So they're a one-use only mechanism. And you might be thinking, okay, that's already worse than dreadnoughts. How are these going to have any significant impact on the game? Well, they're going to have an impact because they double the rewards you get from combat. So if you have a sandworm into the combat and you get 1st, 2nd, or 3rd place rewards, you get double what you'd get otherwise. Which, if you think about it, is actually a pretty big buff to worms. Take 2nd place, for example. If you commit 1 worm and say, I don't know, 2 troops to get 2nd place, which is definitely doable, you get those 2 troops back, you get 2 spice, which I already said is going to be a little bit harder to get spice in this game, and you get 2 intrigue cards, which is really good value. And if you get 1st, hey, you're getting 2 influence with the Bene Gesserit, you're getting 2 intrigue cards. It's an overall pretty solid reward. Additionally, all of the new combat cards come with this new symbol in the top right corner, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. It's a new mechanism they're adding to combat. First of all, let's talk about the new desert spaces. First up, Imperial Basin. This one actually hasn't changed at all, really. Of course, there's a new spy icon, so if you really want to go to the Imperial Basin later, you can. I can't imagine that's going to be a popular spot for spies. But it still does the same thing. It gives you 1 spice at base that has no cost associated with it. And every single round, anyone doesn't go to it, it'll generate a little bit of extra spice with makers. Pretty basic spot, no big difference there. The new difference, and sorry we don't have a higher definition version, are these 2 new spots right here. So first of all, we'll talk about what was the old Imperial Basin. It still requires 1 water, mind you, and it does a similar thing where it can either give you 2 spice plus whatever you get for makers, but now there's a decision to be made here. You can either take that 2 spice or you can deploy a sandworm to the combat, and this is going to be the major way people get sandworms into the game. Of course, there's an opportunity cost there because you're giving up 2 spice to get a sandworm into the combat. So if the combat doesn't reward spice, you are paying 2 spice to get 3 extra strength to get those rewards. So there's going to have to be a decision made there. Do you collect the spice so you can go to something like interstellar shipping or highliners or any of these other spice requiring spots? Or do you get the worm in, try to generate a little bit more value out of this combat, but be a little bit weaker in the combat and in the rest of the game as a result? I really like the design space here. I think it is really important to add a decision to these desert spots because before it was a little bit basic. You just go there, you collect your spice, and you're on with your turn. But now every time you visit here, there's going to be a decision to be made. And that's a common theme with this entire Dune Imperium Uprising, which is why I'm such a big fan already. is the fact that there are so many more decisions to be made every time you're putting a worker down. And whenever there's more decisions to be made, there's more variety in the strategies you can do. I think this is going to be such a rich game. But before I get too distracted, there is still another new spot. It's now called Deep Desert, but now instead of costing 2 water like it did before, it now costs 3 water. Of course, it does give you a little bit more spice if you get there. It gives you 4 spice. But if you don't want to gain that 4 spice, you can instead take 2 worms and deploy them into the combat. My prediction is going to be that this is going to be the main spot for getting sandworms into the combat. And this one's going to be more utilized for generating spice as the game goes on. Because I think paying 3 water to get 2 worms as opposed to paying 1 water to get 1 worm is going to be a value that people don't really love in this game. And they'll probably save this for when a lot of extra spices build up with makers. But we'll see. Okay, now let's talk about this shield wall. I was talking about it before with this symbol right here. But some of the combats in this game are not going to allow you to have sandworms in the battle. And that is because there is a shield wall protecting these spots from the sandworms. And that's very thematic to the books as well. The sandworms couldn't get into these cities or anything because the shield wall, this big rock formation, was there to stop them from getting it. But slight spoiler alert, that shield wall does get destroyed. The sandworms are able to make it into the city. And that's exactly what Siege Tabor allows you to do as well. It allows you to destroy that so that now you can use sandworms in the Imperial Basin and the Arakeen and the Carthag combats. So for example, we have secure Imperial Basin here and battle for the Imperial Basin here. There's a no worm symbol unless somebody has destroyed the shield wall. And if someone destroys the shield wall, now suddenly people can send these worms into the combat and get double rewards. Look at Secure Imperial Basin, for example. If someone was able to get double of the second place award, they get 4 water, 2 troops back. That is insane, insane value. That is so nice. Heck, it even lets you get what? A potential of 1, 2, 3, 4 victory points for first, plus these symbols right here, which we're about to get to right now. But I'd imagine the Sandworm player is going to want to get off this detonation as soon as possible to make their combat worm strategy a little bit stronger into the late and end game. Okay, so these symbols I was talking about before, these are called battle icons. And whenever you win a combat, you are going to take the associated battle icon card and put it in front of you. And these effectively act as half of a victory point. If you're able to get 2 of a matching battle icon card, you flip those over and you get a victory point right then and there. So pretty much all of the combats in the game are going to give a fraction of a victory point associated with the rewards. Additionally, every player in the game is going to start out with one of these battle icon cards. And so everyone is going to have an incentive to go for a different combat throughout the game, depending on what that reward is, which makes for a little bit of asymmetry in how hard people are willing to fight for these different combats. Because by themselves, these battle entry cards aren't going to do anything for you, unless there's some kind of entry card or something that changes that. But most people are going to be incentivized to at least win one of these combats so they can complete their set and score a victory point with it. And while we're talking about it, notice that one of these cards has the first player icon on it. That's how they're going to be deciding the first player in this new game. Something that I'm interested in that I didn't see explicitly stated, and let me know in the comments if this has been confirmed already, but do the Sandworms allow you to gain 2 of these cards when you win, or is it still just 1? Because that would make the Sandworms very good. If with the worms you were able to get, 2 bumps with the Bene Gesserit, 2 injury cards, and a victory point, that's very strong. So let me know if they've confirmed that or not. I didn't see anything explicitly explaining it, but could have missed it. So now, we have been through 3 different spots on the board that requires 2 influence with a faction. We have Siege Tabor that requires 2 influence with the Fremen. We have Imperial Privilege that requires 2 influence with the Emperor track. And we have Shipping that requires 2 influence with the Guild. But what about the Bene Gesserit? Where's their cool spot? Why should I care about a friendship with the Bene Gesserit? Because that's the point of this, right? Currently in the meta, the idea is once you get to 2 influence with them or gain the friendship with them, usually you just want to push towards that alliance because it scares anybody off from trying to challenge you with that alliance. But now that each faction has a bonus spot that rewards you for getting the 2 influence with them, now there's a reason to want to push for multiple different friendships instead of going for that alliance early like it is now, which I think is a really good change. It is a little bit boring that there's no exciting alliance chases at the end of games anymore. Sometimes there are, especially in Immortality, but base game Dune Imperium, I think it was pretty much whoever got up a little bit high, they're safe for most of the game. But the reward that the Bene Gesserit get is a new Arrakis Liaison card. So before, in the base row, you can buy, I don't know how many of them are there, 8 or 10, but it was pretty much a way to get more persuasion into your deck in case that the Imperium row was pretty expensive. And it was a Fremen allied card. It let you go to the green and blue spots. But now they've changed it to Prepare the Way. And it's a Bene Gesserit card, which is very interesting because the deck building strategy with Bene Gesserits is a pretty good strategy currently in Dune Imperium. So having a guaranteed way to get Bene Gesserit and the cards into the deck is a little bit scary, but I guess we'll see the strength of the new Bene Gesserit cards in action. It still costs 2 persuasion like it did before. It still reveals for 2 persuasion, so it is a nice way to increase the overall value of the persuasion in your deck. But now, if you're able to get to 2 influence with the Bene Gesserit, you're able to draw a card. So I think these new Arrakis Lacing cards are going to be really strong. And it does give you a reason to want to push the 2 influence with the Bene Gesserit. I still don't think it's quite as strong as the Fremen or the Guild, but I think it's still going to be stronger than the Emperor. Okay, I referenced it before, but we have contracts in the game, and we still don't have any details onto what these actual contracts are, but they have introduced 2 new spots into the game that interacts with these contracts in some way. That's what I'm assuming anyway. First off, we have the one down here, like the big red arrow showing, and then we also have one under shipping down here. Doesn't look like there's a cost associated with it, and it looks like it also draws you a card. We also have these 2 spots here and here. This one gives you 4 Solari, and this one gives you 2 card draws. I do wonder if maybe the contract is some kind of special mission you can work on, and if you go to one of these contract spots, you can take one of them from some sort of predefined deck. And if you're able to complete them, maybe you can draw 2 cards, or choose if you want to draw Solari. It'll be interesting to see how it actually works out. I also wonder maybe if this has some sort of interaction with the 6-player mode. Maybe the blue team can go here, the red team can go here. I have no idea. It's exciting. Let me know what your ideas on for how contracts are going to work, but that's my best theory right now. I'm not super creative when it comes to these things, but it should be fun, and I will cover it when they do release information on it. But that's all the big stuff with the board. Now I want to talk about some of the new leaders and some of the new cards and intrigues that they added to the game. We already talked about Lady Margot Fenring. She's able to put spies on blue city spots, and she gains 2 spice when she reaches 2 influence with the Bene Gesserit. They give us a sneak peek at some of the other leaders as well, though unfortunately some of the aspects of them are covered up, of course. We have Muad'Dib here, which is going to be the new Paul Atreides-based leader, where they're able to draw a card with every single signet ring play. And it looks like to me that their base ability is on reveal. If they have a Sandworm in the combat, they get to gain 1 intrigue card, which is pretty exciting because we're going to have a leader that focuses on Sandworm combat, which is a pretty exciting aspect of the game in my opinion. We also have the Reverend Mother Jessica, who's going to be kind of the new Ariana Thorvald in this game. She was able to generate water with a signet ring. Reverend Mother Jessica is also able to do a similar thing, but she does have to pay 1 spice for the water, so a little bit weaker. And I think that pays credence to my idea that water is going to be even more valuable in this game, because they think it's too strong to just let her gate on water straight up with the signet ring. They're going to even add a cost on top of it, which I think is a very interesting change. Ariana Thorvald right now generates that water, but she's still rarely picked because water just isn't that valuable in the game right now. We don't know what her base ability is. Maybe her base ability is really good, so they wanted to tone down the signet ring ability by adding the cost, but I'm still going to count on the fact that water is going to be good in this game. And then the 4th one we get to see is called Gurney Halleck. Looks like they're going to be a pretty simple leader. We see that their signet ring gains 1 troop, so they're probably going to be the new beast-like combat leader, but we'll see what their base ability is. We have no idea just yet. We also have some new cards to look at, which is always exciting. First up, we have Branching Path, which is a Bene Gesserit card. Costs 3 persuasion and has access to the Bene Gesserit and the city spots. Cool mechanism here. If you are able to gain the alliance with the Bene Gesserit, you are able to trash one of your intrigue cards, draw a new one, and gain 2 spice. This is a very, very potent reward. And of course, it reveals for 2 persuasion, which is always good. Whenever cards give you a lot of persuasion to reveal, they make you more flexible to going for a spice must flow strategy later. So always something good to look for. The fact that this only costs 3 persuasion is a really great deal and gives you a lot of incentive to push for this Bene Gesserit alliance. I think this is going to be a pretty good card. And I like the design of it having a Bene Gesserit symbol so it can enable you to get the alliance to get this effect. I love it when cards build back into their own strategies. I think that's a very fun design. They played a lot into it in Rise of Ix and Immortality, so I hope they continue that trend with Uprising, which it looks like they are. We also have Ecological Testing Station, which costs 3 persuasion, is a Fremen allied card. It goes to the Fremen space and the city space. If you pay 2 water, it allows you to draw 2 cards, so it pretty much has a built-in resource station ability in there. But I think the real reason people are going to want to go after this card is the reveal effect. Of course, it is 1 persuasion, which isn't ideal, but it's still okay. And it gives you 1 water if you have Fremen Bond. Fremen Bond means you have another card in play that has the Fremen icon. Speaking of Long Live the Fighters, a 7 persuasion card, the most expensive card we've seen so far. Fremen Allied goes to the Fremen and city spaces, just like Ecological Testing Station. And this one is an interesting deck manipulation card. We haven't seen a card quite like this in the game so far. If your deck has 3 or more cards, look at the top 3 cards, draw 1, discard 1, and trash 1. So this is a really cool design. Looking at the top 3 cards already gives you a lot of information. Being able to decide which one you want to pull out of those 3 cards is so good. It gives you some deck building and allows you to trash a card, and then discarding the other card is also pretty powerful, especially if they have the unload mechanism in this game. We'll see if they do. We haven't seen any cards with the unload mechanism, which is where if you discard it or trash it, you get some kind of special effect. They might move away from that design, but I hope they don't. I always love that aspect of the game, so we'll see. And it reveals for 2 Persuasion and 3 Daggers, which is a really strong reveal. 2 Persuasion, like I said, good for buying Spice Flows, and the 3 Daggers is a lot of daggers on reveal. I think this is a very, very good card. Okay, we also have 2 new Space and Guild cards. First up, we have Undercover Asset. Only costs 2, so pretty cheap. It's has Space and Guild and Emperor Allegiance. Very flexible as to where it can go. It can go to the green spaces, the blue spaces, or the orange spaces. And its agent ability reads, ignore influence requirements on board spaces when sending an agent this turn, which is huge. That is a very good effect. If you get Undercover Asset into your deck, you can go to the shipping spot whenever you want. You can go to Seats to Board whenever you want. You can even go to that new Mentat spot whenever you want. This is a very, very strong effect. I think this card is going to be an insta-buy whenever you see it because the agent ability is already good, but they decided, heck, let's make the reveal awesome as well. It lets you put a spy on the board on reveal. I think spies are going to be amazing in this game, and getting to put one down when you reveal this card is huge. And it gives you a little bit of extra flexibility in case, let's say you don't want to spy for whatever reason, being able to reveal it for swords, it's just nuts. I think Undercover Asset is a high A tier card, and I think it's going to be bought up as soon as it pops up on the row. That being said, it's going to be better earlier in the game because once we get into the mid and late games, this agent ability is going to get less and less powerful as people get more of those friendships. But super early, if I'm seeing this in Imperium row, I'm just going to snap that thing up. We also have Guild Envoy, a 3 Persuasion cost card. Space and Guild Allied can go to all 4 of the faction spaces, which is going to be a really good card. When played, it allows you to discard a card, and if you discarded another Space and Guild card, it lets you draw 2 cards. So this is interesting. I actually don't know how strong this effect is going to be. It pretty much just lets you get another Diplomacy card in your deck for extra faction access. It'll depend on how many good Space and Guild cards are in the deck as to whether or not this is a good agent ability. If there's a lot of them, then sure, I think this could work out well, but currently in the game, there's not a lot of great Space and Guild cards. So I think if you threw this into Dune Imperium right now, it wouldn't be that great, but it does only cost 3. So I think for its price level, it's a good card. But unfortunately, it does only reveal for 1 Persuasion, which is a little bit of a nick. So, okay, next up, we have Reliable Informant, a 2 Persuasion cost card, very cheap, Space and Guild Alliance. It lets you only go to the guild spots, but when you play it, you're able to put a spy on either the Emperor, the Bene Gesserit, or the Fremen spots, which is a really good effect. It's not quite as good as the reveal effect we just saw on the other card. Being able to guarantee yourself access to these other spots is going to be really important in this game. It also reveals for 1 Persuasion and 1 Solaris, so it can enable you to get that Swordmaster or that High Council a little bit earlier than otherwise stated, but I think it's pretty good. I would buy it. But with the guild giving a water now, I think the guild spot's going to be pretty big, so I think this is going to be a good buy most of the time. Unfortunately, with the guild spot being pretty good, more people are going to go there. It's going to be harder to play this card. So you're going to get the agent ability less often probably. So you're going to be revealing it more. So that's going to make it a little bit weaker. But overall, right now, I think it's okay. But we'll see how the meta develops and whether or not you're actually able to play this card regularly. Next up, we have Dangerous Rhetoric, a 3 Persuasion cost card. Has green access and a new symbol I haven't explained yet. So this symbol means whenever you play this card, you can send it to any spot where you have a spy, making this card incredibly flexible and a spy-oriented strategy. Because this effectively acts as a power play and it can give you 2 bumps. Let's say you have a spy on the guild spot, for example. You could play this to the guild to gain 1 faction bump, and then trash this card to gain another bump with the guild. And especially with this only costing 3 Persuasion, this is a very good card. Additionally, reveals for 1 Persuasion, 1 Dagger. Fine. We also have 3 new cards they revealed that lean into this spy strategy a little bit more. First up, we have Covert Operation, 3 Persuasion cost card. Has that same symbol, it can go to any spot where you have a spy. And when you play it, each opponent discards a card, which I always hate this effect. It drives me crazy. There are some Bene Gesserit cards in the game right now that make you discard cards. It's something that you always have to remember your opponent has, because if you're building out to a very specific persuasion limit, sometimes it'll force you to discard early and lose that persuasion, so you can't buy that card. It can be frustrating. I think it is okay to have it in the design, but unfortunately, this is a card you're gonna have to remember people have. Although I will say, I think the reveal of this card is a lot better than the agent ability, so I'd imagine we'll see this revealed a lot more because it lets you put down 2 spies on the board, which is insanely strong. I think that's going to be so good. I think Covert Operation is going to go quickly when it's on the thing, because revealing it and being able to guarantee you can go to 2 different spots on the board later in the game just adds so much flexibility to later game strategies and can guarantee you certain actions. I think it's insane. Next up, we have Public Spectacle, which costs a little bit more than Covert Operation, which I already said is a pretty good card. It also can let you go to any spot where you have a spy. And if you recall to spy this turn, which means you used it to either draw a card or infiltrate somewhere, you get to gain a bump, which is a really good effect. I think these cards are pretty good. Additionally, it also reveals for a spy, so it does play into its own strategy a little bit, like I said earlier, which is a really fun design concept. And lastly, we have Strike Fleet, which when you buy it, gives you a single spy to put down on the board. So also enabled itself a little bit. Unfortunately, does not reveal for a spy like these other ones do. So you only get a one and done on this. You'll have to find another way to get spies down on the board. But if you are able to play this card, it lets you get 3 troops into combat, which is a very, very strong way to get troops in. And especially with that, I'd imagine a lot of people having strong combat worm strategies. Having a way to backdoor your way into combats when you're going for a spy-oriented strategy is going to be important for the overall balance of combats, in my opinion. So I think this is going to be a good card. Additionally, revealing for 3 daggers is always going to be good. Catching people off guard with way more daggers than they expected is always a strong thing in this game. So I think all 3 of these cards are going to be really good. Next up, we have the Imperial Spy Master, a 2 persuasion cost card. Has Emperor Allegiance, can go to the Emperor spot or any spy spot. And if you recall to spy this turn, gets you an intrigue card, reveals for 1 persuasion and 1 dagger. I think this is an okay card. It's not game breaking by any sense. If you have a consistent way to generate spies, I think this is going to be an excellent card, because it has so much flexibility in where you can go, and it generates you intrigue cards, which, like I said, are usually pretty good. We'll see how good they are in Uprising. I hope they're still good, because that's what makes them fun, but I think this will end up being a average to above average card, depending how strong intrigue cards are, and how easy it is to get spies down. If there aren't a lot of spy synergy cards and they're hard to get down in this game, this card will probably be a little bit worse, but we'll see. Next up, we have some more expensive cards. First up, we have Desert Power, 6 persuasion cost Fremen card. Allows you to only go to the orange spots, which are a way to get sandworms in. And if you send an agent to a maker board space this turn, which are one of the desert spots, it lets you gain 2 spice, which is a really good effect. Like I said, it's going to be hard to get spice in this game, but I think the reveal effect is also pretty insane. It either lets you get 2 persuasion, so it still has that kind of balance in enabling you to get spice flows in the late game. But if you have maker hooks, you can reveal this by spending a water to gain 1 worm into the combat, which effectively makes it reveal for 3 daggers if you think about it. So I don't think the combat potential of this card is as strong as some of the other cards we've seen that just give you 3 daggers straight up. You do have to pay the water for this one, and you will probably have to pay water to send it to one of the orange spots as well. But it's good for catching people off guard in that you get double rewards from the combat, which I still think is pretty good. It's a pretty expensive card for what it does. We'll see how strong the worm strategies are in this game. I think this isn't quite as strong as some of those other cards we saw. I'd say maybe a B tier card. I could get eaten alive for that, but 6 persuasion is pretty expensive, and I don't know if it's that good to warrant it. Don't get me wrong, I think the orange ability is very strong, especially if you can go for Imperial Basin for 0 water. Turns it into a 3 spice spot, which is a great way to generate resources, but I think it's just okay. We also have Leadership here, another Fremen card, costs 5 persuasion. And for each sandworm you have in the conflict, draw a card. So that's an interesting one. So in the perfect world, you get 2 sandworms in by going to the deep desert spot. Then you play Leadership, you get to draw 2 cards, which is really great value. We'll see how common it is to have 2 sandworms into the combat. 3 water is not cheap by any stretch. So in order to get this effect, you would have had to already spend 3 water, unless there's some other cards that can kind of generate worms for you. But it also reveals for 2 persuasion, a dagger, and this is going to be that effect where for every other card that reveals for a dagger, you get 1 more dagger this turn. Always a really fun, really strong effect. I love cards with this text on it. It makes combat-oriented strategy so much better. It kind of gives you more of a reason to buy more cards with daggers, because usually, all else being equal, you're going to want to go for the high persuasion card costs over the ones that just give you a dagger. But this kind of turns that ideology on its head. So I actually really like Leadership. I think it's a fun card. We can kind of make out that it has Fremen access. If it's like the other cards, it'll probably have city access as well. I think these cards are interesting. I don't think they're quite as strong as the other cards we were talking about, but I think they're fun. We have a couple of cards here. We don't really get to see a lot. Like, we know that this one goes to orange and has some kind of interaction with maker hooks, but we'll see what those show. Interestingly, I thought, though, they have a different symbol in the top right. You see this one has 6 persuasion cost card, but this one doesn't have a cost here. So I wonder if that's some kind of interaction with the 3 versus 3 mode. Maybe instead of buying cards, you get to start with some special cards in your deck. I'm really curious to see what these cards are actually, like how they're involved in the game. Let me know if you have any predictions on how they're going to be involved. But we do get to make out one card right here. It's called Price is No Object. It costs 6 persuasion. It gives you 2 Solari when you buy it. It has an allegiance with the Emperor and the Bene Gesserit. It can go to the Emperor spots or the Bene Gesserit spots. I spent a lot of time trying to decipher what this text is, but what I think it says is you may acquire a card to your hand using Solari instead of Persuasion, is my best guess, which is a really fun mechanism. They have something like this in Rise of Ix. I think this is an insanely good card. Even if you're not using the agent ability, getting 2 Solari plus 2 Solari every time you reveal it is very strong. And then also being able to just get cards into your hand by paying for them with Solari, I think this is a really cool effect. Let it be known that the Rise of Ix effect I was talking about was for the tech, so it's a little bit different, but I think this card is going to be awesome. I'm super excited to play with it. I hope it's really good. I think it is going to be really good, but yeah, cool card. And of course, with this new game, we also have a couple of new Intrigue cards. We have Depart for Arrakis. Lets you pay 2 spice to get 3 troops, and if you have 3 influence with the guild, you gain 1 card draw. Okay, it can let you steal combats away from people when they're not expecting it, so I think that effect is always going to be pretty good in this game. We have a new endgame card revealed. We have Shadow Alliance here, and if you have 4 or more influence on a faction track where an opponent has an alliance, you get 1 victory point. I think this will help people that have that kind of terrible feeling when they're racing someone else for an alliance, but they lose it. Getting Shadow Alliance can kind of make it like, hey, you know what? I still got my victory point. It's not that bad. I think this is a pretty fun card. It'll be interesting to see how obvious it is when people have it, because usually when you've lost that alliance, there's no reason to keep bumping up, but now you'll have a reason to keep gaining influence with a faction where you've already guaranteed can't get the alliance. So I think this is a fun element of design. And then we also have tactical option, 2 daggers, and it can let you retreat some troops. We have a card like this in the game currently. I think the current version lets you gain 3 swords and lets you retreat 3 troops. So slightly less swords, but lets you retreat more. I don't think the retreat option is usually that great. A lot of people don't use them very often. Usually people are playing these for the swords, but we'll see. I think it's an okay combat card. It's not going to blow anyone's mind. We also have Inspire All, acquire a card that costs 3 or less. And if you have 1 or more of your sandworms in the combat, put that card in your hand, which is a pretty fun little bit of a design. And we have Devour, which gives you 2 daggers. And if you have more than 1 sandworm in the combat, you gain 2 additional swords and a trash. So these are both kind of playing around the new sandworm design. I think Inspire All is a nice little balance between the fact that sandworms are going to be a combat strategy. It gets you a little bit more deck building in there, which I think is fun. And I like that they're playing around with the idea of acquiring cards to your hand more. I love that idea with the Leilaxu Master in the Immortality expansion. Just the fact that when you're playing with cards off the row makes your options so much more variable. You become harder to play around, and it makes it more exciting when new cards pop up in the row. We've already seen that with Price is No Object. Now we have an Intrigue card that does it. I love the idea, and I hope they keep pushing it. And we have a couple of new plotware endgame cards. These pretty much just make it so that, let's say you weren't able to complete your set and get that victory point. If you happen to draw on one of these, you can complete the set, get the victory point. I think it makes sense having these cards in the game. And if you happen to get one, but it doesn't match your card, now you have a reason to go after that combat. I like them. I think they're okay. And then we also have Detonation, which is pretty much just an Intrigue card that lets you destroy the shield wall. And then we also have Deploy up to 4 of your troops from the garrison to the conflict. Like I said, I always love these effects. Being able to catch people off guards with a bunch of troops in the combat out of nowhere is always a fun idea to me. So like I said, there are still some things we don't know about yet. This Cho module, this 6-player mode, contracts. As details come out about these, I will continue to put videos out about them. So if you want to be updated when I post those videos, subscribe to the channel. It helps me out a lot and it'll keep you informed. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.